Got an interesting little streamer fly for you today. I call this the double N number 12. And I'll elaborate after the fly is tied on the naming of this particular fly. But the history is that it either got tied up or got purchased and was sitting in my box for a number of years, never really used it until one day I wasn't catching any smallmouth on this nice little Michigan stream, tied this on, started picking them up left and right. Since then, it has been a nice productive pattern, especially in clear, slower water. It's been very productive for me, and I thought it would be an interesting fly, a streamer to tie. It's very basic, some Grizzly Marabou for the tail, the throat, and the wing, the lie stub on the body. It's a very quick fly to tie. So that is the double N number 12, and we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to start the double N number 12 by placing my hook in the vise. This is a Mustad R72. In the older nomenclature, this was a 9671. It's a 3X long hook. You could also use like a Tiemco 5262 if you want. I'm going to debarb the hook. I generally like to debarb the hooks, but also we have a bead that we need to put onto the front of this. So I'm going to have to, sometimes you have to debarb the hooks, and it makes it easier for that bead to go around the bend by debarbing it right here. I'm going to put the bead onto the hook. This is a gold 3/16 bead. And then I'll mount the hook back into the vise. Before I attach my thread, I'm going to put some wire along the hook shank. I'm using a .020 lead wire. I only need to put about 10 or 12 wraps onto the hook shank, and that will give it a little bit more weight. If you don't want the fly to go down that deep, then certainly you don't have to add the added wraps of lead. I put 11 wraps there. With this tag in the back, that'll probably make it about 12 wraps. Then you're going to push all of those wraps right up into the bead. This is going to concentrate the weight in the front of the fly. It will also help hold our bead in place. I'm going to use two different threads on this, and this is just for convenience sake. The first thread that I'm going to use is a UTC 140 Denier in white. I'm going to attach this right behind the thread wraps. Just building up a little bit of a thread dam here. I don't have to have a whole lot for this. And then I'm going to put some wraps right over the lead wraps. This is just going to hold them in place a little bit. Once I have that done, I'm going to advance my thread down to the end of the hook shank, and I will trim away the excess. The double N, well, I should say the no-name fly here, this particular one, uses Grizzly Marabou for the tail, the wing, and the throat on this. And I'm just using a tan color. I've used olive colors, natural colors too. You can experiment a little bit with if you want with that. But I've selected 3 different feathers. The tail feather, I like to have a medium-sized feather. It doesn't have to be really big. I'm going to tie this in, and I want this to be about a hook length long. And I'm going to tie this in so that it actually is more vertical on the back end. I don't want it twisted around to one side. It doesn't really matter, I think, when this is flowing in the water, but it just looks a little bit better. That's a little bit long. If it's too long, too short, just unwrap it, take it back out, see where you need to tie that in. and just tie that in the right place. Now I've got a little bit of a twist here. As you can see, it's twisted towards me. So I'm going to unwrap this and again wrap it in. You don't think, as I said, that if you're tying some of these up, it's probably not critical that it be nice and vertical, but I think it looks a little bit better. I'm going to lash this down the hook shank, gives it a little bit more bulk, all the way up to those lead wraps, and then I'll trim away the excess. This is a great little beginner fly because of the fact it can be kind of messy. It has some nice, interesting techniques to it. It doesn't have to be nice and perfect. Now this is why I use the larger thread right here. I'm just going to go back and forth, covering up everything, and having a larger thread on here just helps with that. Especially if you're using a darker color Grizzly Marabou on this, then none of that color will come through with the ice dub. Once I have that covered up, I'll run my thread back down to the end of the shank, and now I'm ready for some dubbing. For the body on this and the little collar behind the bead, I'm going to be using some UV ice dub. This is a pearl color, and all I want to do is create just a sparse, I don't want to say sparse, but it doesn't have to be thick and bulky, tapered body. This is a bait fish, so we want to keep this so that it is going to be narrower in the back and growing a little bit fatter and thicker as we get up towards the bead. Don't worry about it if it's a little bit bushy. Have to add a little bit more, then just add just a little bit more. If you don't like how some of it went on, it kind of clumped up right there, just unwrap it, smooth that out a little bit more. I want to leave just about an eye width right behind the gold bead here. That's where we're going to be tying in our throat and our wing. And I'm going to finish off with a little bit of red ice dub. So with our thread just behind the bead here, we're ready to tie in our throat. Now the throat on this, I generally am looking for, when I get this and start these flies, I take a bunch of these loose feathers out and put them on the table, and I'm looking for one that's not quite as full and round. I want it to be a little bit straighter so that when I tie that in, I want the tips to go just to the point of the hook or maybe a little bit past, but I want them to be a little straighter and not quite as curved and round. I prefer to cut the excess off at the tie-in point. I'll flip my fly over and I'll tie these and secure these in just right behind the bead on the underside. Those again are a little long. I think that's fine right there. I can trim those back. Wet these down a little bit to keep those out of the way. Now we're ready to tie in our wing. For the wing on this, I like another rounded feather. So I'm going to select one that's it's more rounded, and it's also a little bit wider, because I want this to be a kind of a broad profile on top. Now, this does not swim like this in the water. Keep that in mind. This will not be supported and out here at an angle in the water. This is going to kind of flop down and flash around, but it does add a little bit more material to it, and it's all going to be flowing and undulating from where the tie-in spot is behind the bead. I want the wing to go about halfway down the tail, so I will take a look. There's my tie-in spot, and just like the other components, I'm just going to push the material together on the stem right here, and I'm just going to tie that in. I do prefer to have these sticking up more vertical. Again, if it twists a little bit, I don't think it's really going to matter. I think it will still fish just as well. That one also is just a little long. Once I get a half a dozen wraps in there, I will trim away the excess of the feather. Sweeping both the throat and the feather back a little bit, cover up the butt ends with some thread wraps, secure all those down. And then I'm going to put in some red eye stub. This is simply to cover up the white thread wraps. And it also gives it a little contrast in color. And if it's shallow enough and the red shows up, then it can trigger some fish in terms of thinking that these are gills or something going on right behind the head of this bait fish. I'm going to wrap over that 2 or 3 times just to make certain that I have some thread wraps over that to hold that in real well. Here you want to be careful. You don't want to put too many thread wraps right up front, because then you'll have a buildup of thread wraps right behind the bead. With that wrapped in, I'm going to put in a 4 or 5 turn whip finish. Cut away my thread. I will add some head cement all around those thread wraps, and that will soak down in there and secure that real well. As you can see, this no-name fly is a very, very quick and easy fly to put together. In no time at all, you can have a half dozen, a dozen of these. The interesting thing, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the video, that I call this a no-name fly because I don't know what the name of it is, as I mentioned. I thought that when I first used this a long time ago and it became a productive pattern, that I had picked it up somewhere as, say, a steelhead imitation or something like that, as a little fry kind of thing. I checked with a bunch of friends of mine, guides, other fishermen, and so on, and nobody had ever seen this fly before, so they didn't know what the name of it was. So that's how I lumped this into just another no-name fly. I figured I was at a tying session with somebody and came up with this with some scraps on the table or something. And there's a number of patterns that I do fish that are that way that really don't have a name to them. I just call them no names and then give them a number. So to shorten it up, I call it a double N number 12. So that's kind of the story behind this fly. It's an easy fly to tie. You can do different variations. I tie up and fish often a olive version of it, and it's the same thing. It just has olive Grizzly Marabou on it. I'm certain you could do some chickapoo or some other type of fluffy, hen feather or something for this. And the body, if you don't have ice dub, just use whatever you have. I think that would probably work just fine. But amazingly, this little fly has been a nice producer for me over the last number of years. And who knew how long it sat in my box. And, like I said, I probably tied it at some session and forgot about it. But it has been a good pattern, and it's just a fun little quick fly to tie. So there you have it. That's the double N number 12. Thanks for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.